Welcome back to Coins Numismatic Series, where every coin has a story, every detail can matter, and sometimes an ordinary-looking 5-cent piece can turn out to be far more interesting than you ever imagined. Today, we are diving into two Jefferson Nickels that may look familiar, may still be sitting in old collections, coin jars, or inherited boxes, but can become much more intriguing when you know exactly what to look for. So before you spin that old nickel or toss it back into circulation, stay with me, because we are going to examine the history, design, mintage, errors, condition, market values, and collector interest surrounding both of these fascinating Monticello nickels. 1964 Jefferson Nickel. The 1964 Jefferson Nickel is one of the most fascinating dates in the entire Jefferson Nickel series, because its enormous production tells us a remarkable story about the United States economy and the pressures facing the U.S. Mint during the early 1960s. The standard 1964 Jefferson Nickel without a mint mark was struck at Philadelphia, and approximately 1,028,622,762 examples were produced. That is more than 1 billion nickels from a single date. When we add the Denver production of 1,787,297,160 examples, the total number of 1964 dated business strike Jefferson Nickels becomes an astonishing figure. In fact, the 1964 D remains famous for having the highest mintage of any Jefferson Nickel date, according to PCGS Coin Facts. But there is an important historical detail behind those numbers. The early 1960s were a period of severe coin shortages in the United States. Increasing use of vending machines, toll systems, and other coin-operated equipment created enormous demand for circulating coins. At the same time, the Mint believed that collectors and speculators were contributing to the shortage by removing coins from circulation. In response, Mint Director Eva Adams took measures intended to discourage coin hoarding. One of the major consequences was the removal of mint marks from U.S. coinage beginning in 1965. The 1964 dated nickel therefore occupies an important transitional position because Denver continued using the D mint mark on the 1964 issue before the no mint mark policy took effect. The coin itself follows Felix Schlag's classic Jefferson nickel design, which had been introduced in 1938. On the obverse, you see a left-facing portrait of Thomas Jefferson. The words Liberty and the date appear around the portrait, while I in God We Trust is positioned along the opposite side. On the reverse is the building that gives this coin its nickname in many collecting circles, Monticello, Jefferson's Virginia home. Above and around the building are United States of America and E Pluribus Unum, while Monticello and 5 cents appear below. The nickel has a plain edge, measures approximately 21.2 millimeters in diameter, weighs 5 grams, and is composed of 75% copper and 25% nickel. For collectors, however, the most important part of the reverse may not be the building itself. It is the steps leading up to Monticello. These tiny architectural lines are known as full steps, commonly abbreviated FS. A sharply struck Jefferson nickel can display 5 or 6 distinct, uninterrupted steps. On older Jefferson nickels, including the 1964 issue, finding a coin with strong full steps detail can be much more difficult than finding the same date in ordinary condition. PCGS notes that the dies used during the 1960s did not always include a complete 6th step, meaning that 5 full steps can represent an exceptional strike for some coins from this era. This is where the enormous mintage becomes almost misleading. A coin can have more than 1 billion examples produced and still become difficult in top condition. The reason is simple. Surviving population and surviving quality are two completely different things. Most 1964 nickels entered circulation, were handled repeatedly, carried in pockets, dropped into machines, rubbed against other coins, and eventually accumulated scratches, contact marks, discoloration, and wear. Finding a truly pristine example with strong luster, minimal contact marks, and exceptionally sharp Monticello steps is another matter entirely. The 1964 D is particularly interesting because PCGS has documented a very small number of high-grade full steps examples compared with the enormous original production. PCGS lists an auction record of $9,900 for a 1964 D Jefferson Nickel graded MS 67 full steps, sold by Heritage Auctions on May 4, 2025. That is a perfect illustration of an important numismatic principle. The date alone does not make the coin valuable. The combination of date, mint mark, grade, strike quality, and full steps designation is what can create serious collector value. The 1964 nickel also has a fascinating variety and error history. One of the most notable varieties is the 1964 D/D repunched mint mark, cataloged as FS 501. A repunched mint mark occurred when the mint mark was punched into the working die more than once, with the impressions not perfectly aligned. Under magnification, collectors may see traces of an earlier D beneath or beside the final mint mark. This is a variety rather than simply random damage, and authenticated examples can command substantial premiums. One reported 1964 D/D RPM graded MS66 sold for $19,800 in July 2022, demonstrating how dramatically a recognized variety can change the value of an otherwise common date. There are also more dramatic mint errors associated with 1964 Jefferson Nickels. These include off-center strikes, multiple strikes, broad strikes, die caps, improperly annealed planchets, struck-through errors, and wrong planchet errors. A particularly dramatic wrong planchet error occurs when a Jefferson nickel design is struck on a planchet intended for another denomination. Copper-colored examples struck on cent planchets can be especially eye-catching, while nickel designs struck on dime planchets can create unusual diameter, weight, and appearance combinations. Reported examples of significant wrong planchet and major striking errors have sold for hundreds or even more than $1,000, depending heavily on authenticity, grade, rarity, and the dramatic nature of the error. And this is where caution becomes extremely important. Not every strange-looking 1964 nickel is an error. Damage from parking lots, machines, pliers, chemicals, grinding, polishing, or intentional alteration can create appearances that resemble mint errors. A genuine mint error should make sense in terms of how coins were manufactured. That is why serious collectors rely on weight, diameter, die characteristics, strike characteristics, and professional authentication rather than simply assuming that an unusual appearance means rarity. As for market value, the ordinary circulated 1964 Philadelphia nickel is generally not a high-dollar coin. Depending on condition and the buyer's market, circulated examples can be worth little more than face value, while uncirculated coins can bring premiums. Current published guides show a broad range because grade and full steps make an enormous difference. Gray Sheet, for example, lists the 1964 regular issue in a range extending from face value into the hundreds of dollars for higher grades, while full steps examples have a much higher ceiling. The 1964 D also ranges from ordinary low-value examples to much more valuable high-grade full steps coins. So if you have a 1964 Jefferson nickel, do not immediately assume that you have a rare treasure, but do not dismiss it either. Start by identifying whether it has a D mint mark. Then examine the surfaces, luster, strike quality, and especially the steps of Monticello. Use magnification to inspect the mint mark for a possible repunched D variety. Check the coin's weight and dimensions if something looks unusual. And most importantly, never clean the coin. Cleaning can permanently damage the original surface and substantially reduce its numismatic desirability. The real attraction of the 1964 Jefferson Nickel is that it combines an enormous historical production run with conditional rarity. More than 1 billion were made at Philadelphia, and nearly 1.8 billion more were struck at Denver. Yet elite examples with superb preservation and full steps can be surprisingly difficult to locate. That contrast is exactly what makes the coin so enjoyable to search. You are not hunting for a rare date in the traditional sense. You are hunting for quality, varieties, and genuine mint-made abnormalities hiding inside an otherwise common coin. 1979 D. Jefferson Nickel. Now let us move forward about 15 years to another Monticello nickel that can be overlooked because of its relatively recent date, the 1979 D. Jefferson Nickel. At first glance, this looks like a straightforward modern-era 5-cent piece, and in circulated condition, that is generally exactly what it is. But once again, the story changes when condition, strike quality, and full steps enter the picture. The 1979 D was struck at the Denver Mint, and the reported mintage was 325,867,672 pieces. That is a substantial production number, but considerably lower than the extraordinary output of the 1964 D. The coin retains the standard Jefferson nickel composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel, weighs 5 grams, measures 21.2 millimeters across, and has a plain edge. Felix Schlag's Jefferson portrait remains on the obverse, while Monticello dominates the reverse. The historical environment was very different from 1964. By 1979, the United States had moved through significant economic changes, including inflation and rising prices. The nickel was still an important circulating denomination, and the Denver Mint was producing hundreds of millions of pieces for commerce. Unlike the 1964 issue, the 1979 D was not caught in the same transition involving the elimination of mint marks. The D beneath the date clearly identifies Denver production. The design is familiar, but this is where collectors should slow down and examine the coin carefully. The obverse features Jefferson's portrait facing left. In God We Trust appears along the left side, while Liberty and the date are positioned on the right. The small d mint mark sits beneath the date. On the reverse, Monticello is centered, with Monticello beneath the building, 5 cents below that, and the inscriptions United States of America and E Pluribus Unum surrounding the architectural design. Graysheet confirms the 1979 D's standard specifications and identifies full steps as a designation for coins where the steps of Monticello are clearly defined. For most collectors, the most important factor is again condition. A worn 1979 D nickel is common. A nice uncirculated example is more interesting. But a superb mint state example with strong luster, minimal marks, excellent strike quality, and full steps can become a completely different collectible. The 1979 D is particularly useful for teaching new collectors why mintage figures alone do not determine value. With more than 325 million pieces struck, there is no reason to treat every 1979 D as a rare coin. Yet top-grade examples can still bring significant premiums because so many coins were damaged or imperfectly struck during production and circulation. The marketplace is therefore focused on the survivors that combine excellent preservation with exceptional strike detail. PCGS records an auction result of $345 for a regular strike 1979 D Jefferson Nickel graded MS67, sold by Heritage Auctions in April 2008. That already shows a substantial premium over 5 cents for an elite grade example. But the full steps designation can push the coin into an entirely different category. PCGS lists an auction record of $4,500 for a 1979 D Jefferson Nickel graded MS67 full steps, sold in November 2022. That $4,500 result is one of the most important numbers to remember from this coin because it demonstrates the difference between a common date and a conditional rarity. The date is common. The mint mark is common. The denomination is common. But a coin combining exceptional grade and full steps can be dramatically scarcer. The steps are critical because the reverse design was struck onto a relatively small area, and the highest points of the architectural details were vulnerable to weakness. Contact between the die and planchet, die wear, planchet quality, and striking pressure could all influence the final appearance. A coin can look brilliant and nearly flawless at first glance, and still fail to qualify for full steps because one or more of the lines across the Monticello steps are interrupted. Collectors searching for a valuable 1979 D should therefore examine the reverse before getting too excited about the shiny surface. Look directly at the steps below Monticello. You want crisp, uninterrupted horizontal lines rather than mushy or blended detail. Then inspect the fields around Jefferson's portrait for scratches and contact marks. A coin that appears perfect to the naked eye may reveal numerous small marks under magnification, and at the highest grading levels, those tiny imperfections can make a major difference. Another important factor is luster. Original mint state luster should have a natural, rotating appearance when the coin is tilted under light. A bright coin is not necessarily an uncirculated coin, and an artificially polished coin can sometimes look brighter than an original example while being far less desirable to collectors. Again, avoid cleaning. As for errors, Collectors should look for genuine striking abnormalities rather than ordinary post-mint damage. Potential discoveries can include off-center strikes, broad strikes, clipped planchets, die cracks, doubled design elements, struck-through errors, and other manufacturing abnormalities. However, because modern-era Jefferson Nickels are heavily collected and frequently examined, attribution matters. A random scratch across the date is not a doubled die. A raised line is not automatically a die crack. A flattened edge caused by a machine is not necessarily a broad strike. If you believe you have a genuine major error, preservation becomes extremely important. Keep the coin in its original state and avoid cleaning, polishing, scraping, or attempting to remove stains. A reputable grading or authentication service can determine whether an unusual feature is mint-made, and certification can become especially valuable when a coin has substantial potential market value. For ordinary circulated 1979 D nickels, values are generally close to face value. Published catalog information shows very low values for typical examples, while the premium rises with grade and especially with full steps. PCGS's documented auction results demonstrate that high-grade and full steps pieces can bring hundreds or thousands of dollars, although auction records should never be interpreted as guaranteed prices for every coin. The actual selling price depends on grade, certification, eye appeal, strike, provenance, timing, and collector demand. And that brings us to the biggest lesson from the 1979 D Jefferson Nickel. Do not judge a coin solely by age. A coin from 1979 may look too modern to be interesting, but condition rarity can transform an ordinary circulating denomination into a serious collectible. The key is learning how professional collectors evaluate coins. Date, mint mark, grade, strike, luster, surface preservation, full steps, varieties, and errors all work together. If you find a 1979 D in an old collection or coin jar, start with the basics. Confirm the D mint mark. Check the date. Examine the obverse for wear and contact marks. Then flip the coin over and focus on Monticello. Study the steps carefully. If they are unusually sharp and uninterrupted, the coin deserves much closer attention. A certified full steps example in a top grade can be worth dramatically more than an ordinary example of the exact same date and mint mark. When we put these two coins side by side, the contrast is fascinating. The 1964 Jefferson Nickel represents an extraordinary period of American coin production, with more than 1 billion Philadelphia examples and nearly 1.8 billion Denver examples. Its famous 1964 D issue combines enormous mintage with surprising difficulty at the highest grades and full steps levels. It also offers collectors an intriguing repunched mint mark variety and a range of dramatic mint errors. The 1979 D, meanwhile, comes from a later generation of Jefferson Nickels and has a mintage of 325,867,672. It is not a traditional scarce date, but high-grade full steps examples can command substantial premiums. The documented $4,500 auction result for an MS-67 full steps specimen is a powerful reminder that condition can matter far more than age. So the next time you see a Jefferson Nickel dated 1964 or 1979 with a D mint mark, take another look. Check the surfaces. Check the strike. Check Monticello. Check those steps. And if something looks unusual, investigate it before spending it. Because in numismatics, the most exciting discoveries are not always the coins everyone already knows are rare. Sometimes they are the ordinary coins that become rare only when you understand exactly what you are looking at. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the 1964 and 1979 D Jefferson Nickels, make sure you stay with Coins Numismatic Series for more coin history, era varieties, market values, and the details that can turn a 5-cent piece into a fascinating numismatic discovery. And remember, never clean a potentially valuable coin. Never assume an unusual mark is automatically a mint error, and always examine condition and strike quality before deciding what your coin is worth. Until next time, keep searching, keep learning, and keep looking closely, because you never know what piece of American history might be hiding in your pocket.